All right, welcome everyone. This session is called Boost Your EQ, How Client Care and Professional Relationships Can Make a Difference, with our speaker, the wonderful Janky De Palma. I want to first thank our sponsors. It's because of all these wonderful supporters that we could create such a great conference, especially STG, who is this session's sponsor, and I want to play a tiny little video. That's it.
That was wonderful. I haven't seen that video before. It was great.
Great. All right. Well, now let me introduce our speaker. Janky De Palma is the Business Development Manager at DCI Engineers. Her primary role is to teach and train engineers to make connections, grow their professional networks, and build relationships. Her kids refer to her as a professional friend maker. I love that. She's a big AI Austin supporter, and I can attest to that. She's involved in Women in Architecture and is a proud alumni of the AIA Austin Leadership Collective, class of 2019. The career road not taken for Janky was teacher, so she's excited that she can share all her ideas to a captive audience. And you are a captive audience.
You're not going anywhere.
That's right. All right, Janky, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. This is my talk, Boost Your EQ, How Client Care and Professional Relationships Can Make a Difference. As Ingrid said, I'm Janky De Palma. I am the Business Development Manager at DCI Engineers. I want to walk us through EQ, kind of talk about things, and I saved some time at the end for questions, but as you have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, because sometimes like questions pop in as you're hearing things and you forget them. So I won't get to them until the end, but I don't want that to prevent you from asking them. So here's a roadmap of what we're going to talk about today. I want us to learn about why EQ, emotional intelligence is important. I want you to understand how and why clients choose. There's 4 areas of EQ that we're going to focus on, and I want you to learn how to boost your skills in each of these quadrants. And also how stronger EQ skills can help you and your firm. And then we're going to be stealing tips from the experts that we can use ourselves. One way to frame emotional intelligence that I like to do is to think of it as a software. Like if I told you that there is this amazing software that 76% of employees agree increases productivity. 90% of CEOs say that all companies need this. 35% of employees would rather forego a pay raise if their manager had this software. And if you use this software, you could increase client loyalty from 12% to 40%. Would you be interested in the software? Would you want to know about it? Would you want to use it? Would you recommend your firm use it? Most likely, yes. So this isn't a software. Instead, what this is emotional intelligence. What exactly is emotional intelligence? Emotional intelligence is the capacity to be aware of and control and express one's emotions, to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically. It's basically what we might refer to as people skills. We have our IQ, which is our intelligence quotient, but EQ really is the ability to sort of understand emotions and not have them control you. Why does EQ matter? EQ turns out to be one of the prime differentiators in professions that rely on a high IQ. So, for example, groups like medicine and law, engineering, architecture, by nature, people who are in this group are exceptionally bright. You have a very high IQ. So the real big differentiator between anyone within this subsect is having emotional intelligence. And despite like some of the tropes that you might see where, someone's very bright, but they don't have a lot of people skills, EQ and IQ are not mutually exclusive of each other. You can have people who have an extremely high IQ, and then they also have really high EQ. Higher EQ, higher emotional intelligence, it also leads to social skills, trust, helping with anger management, better teamwork, stress tolerance, better time management, and change management. These are all things that are so important. Think back to those stats that I brought up earlier. The fact that 35% of employees would forego a pay raise just to have this shows how important EQ is. It's true or false? This virtual stuff can be so hard because if we were here in person, I just have you raise your hands, but I just want you to think about this. Clients choose architects based on price, expertise, and reputation. True or false? If you thought it was true, I'm sorry to burst your bubble. This is not true. Most people make a decision with their heart and justify it with their head. People like to work with people that they know, like, and trust. Still don't believe me? Daniel Kahneman is a economist who won the Nobel Prize based on his research that looked at economics and emotions. And his research in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, the research showed that people would rather do business with those that they like and trust, even if it costs them more. So keep that in mind. So remember, it's your price and your reputation and expertise. These aren't things that really matter. What really matters to your clients is, do they know you, do they like you, and do they trust you? So you might be saying, well, can I even boost my EQ? Is this a fixed thing? The answer is yes. EQ is a skill versus sort of like a fixed set of abilities. So the way I like to think of EQ is kind of like a language. There's some people who are native speakers. There's some people who maybe learn skills earlier, so they become fluent. There's some people who have like a natural aptitude towards language, but everyone can learn those language skills. You can learn the fundamentals, you can learn the vocabulary. The same thing is true with emotional intelligence. You can get better at your people skills. Just take some awareness and practice. So there's 4 elements of EQ that I want us to kind of focus on. It involves ourself and others, and then it talks about what I see and what I do. So perceptions and actions. So the first one is self-awareness. It's all basically, what are my emotions? Can I identify them? And can I see how they affect others? The next is social management. What do I see with others? Are you good at reading other people's emotions and acknowledging them? The next is action. It's empathy. What do I do? Can I understand other people's point of view and their perspectives? And then finally, it's others and actions, relationship management. How do I grow relationships? Let's dive into the first one, which is self-awareness. This one is really one that you start with. It's the best, one of my favorites to start with. And it's one where you have to spend a little bit of time looking at yourself honestly. It's where you look at, what are my strengths and weaknesses? What are my go-to reactions to stress? Like when I get stressed out, do I shut down? Am I like hot-tempered? What's happening here? Am I aware of my mood and emotions without judgment? So you might have emotions that you consider negative emotions like anger or sadness. It's okay to have those emotions. It's really good to be able to identify them. You don't necessarily have to be driven by them. It's just you being able to look at these emotions without judgment. And then the biggest one is, what is the effect on others? What is my mood and my emotions? How does that affect all the people around me? When you lack self-awareness, this is what you see. You see the insensitivity, arrogance, volatility, rigidity, selfishness. I sometimes think about, it's comical, but the boss in The Office, Michael Scott, often shows this. He is someone who is comically self unaware. He's completely clueless about his emotions and his, like, how he comes across to people and just how he interacts with people. That's like the funny side of it. But, when we looked at those stats about how people can work better based on having better emotional intelligence, it's this stuff that comes in. When you think about like your worst boss, the coworker that drives you crazy, a client that you're just not connecting with, oftentimes there's some element of like a lack of self-awareness that's the driver of that. So for yourself, the thing you need to start with is just understanding and owning those emotions. Daniel Goleman is one of the premier researchers of emotional intelligence, and he has written a couple of great books. And they talk a lot about like EQ in the workplace and EQ in other people. This quote is just spot on to me. It's really all about, you got to tune into your own emotions first. Otherwise, you're going to be really poor at reading them in other people. So when we talk about that other quadrant, what do I perceive in others? There's several elements of that. We all know that about at least 70% of communication is expressed non-verbally. It's not the words that I chose, but it's like all the other things that are part of what that message is. One thing that I want us to focus on that I think is kind of meaty and pretty fun is micro expressions. These are those little like flashes that come on your face that usually don't even have control over. And they are a great expression of what someone's feeling. And I don't think this is a surprise to anybody. You watch any reality TV show or you go to an OAC meeting, you're going to see people's face flash with emotion. What is interesting is to sort of take the time to realize, like, what exactly am I looking for? What does that equate to in terms of the emotion? And then what do I do about it? So I'm going to go through some of these. They're going to be a little bit like over exaggerated expressions, but I want us to look at some of the signs and then keep in the back of your mind going, okay, why am I looking for this? What do I do with this? Because remember, it's all about perceptions in others. This is the second quadrant. So there's 7 basic expressions to look at. The first is anger. So you'll notice you have the knit brows. Sometimes you get those 11s right here. There's a tense jaw, tense lower mouth. You're gonna get the death stare, the narrow eyes. Surprise! As I was taking selfies in preparation for the talk, my 9-year-old son wanted to get in the mix. He argued that he's a much cuter model, which I could not disagree with. So I took some pictures with him as well. And I would give him the prompt and kind of tell him what I was looking for. So surprise, you're going to see it's like the dropped mouth, the eyebrows are widened, the raised, widened eyes. This is a little different from the wide eyes in fear. Fear is a primordial response. I mean, really is going to be triggering your body's flight or fight syndromes. And with those reactions, and basically at this point, like the amygdala, which is the back of your brain, is going to be lit up. So your body is going through this response with the wide eyes, like you are actually taking in your surroundings. So the fear could be something that's not necessarily physical, but you're going to still have a physical reaction. You're going to look and see, like, is there a tiger in the back that's just about to jump out at me? Your eyes are raised, and then your nostrils are flared. You have an intake of breath that's adding oxygen to those muscles. Because if you have to run because of the tiger, your body is getting yourself ready for that. You can see for both Nate and me, our neck muscles are tense because we're actually taking that breath in. So this is a fear sign. Then there's happiness. We all know what a happy face looks like, but what I want you to pay particular attention to are the crinkly eyes. This is the difference between a real smile and sort of like that fake polite smile, which sometimes you're not sure like what made the difference. It's the eyes. It's always, always have some kind of narrowing, crinkling of the eyes. Naturally, your mouth is going to go up, your cheeks are going to rise too. Sadness. Sadness is just like that emoji. It's like everything's pulled down. Your eyes are narrowed, your eyebrows are pulled together. There's the down pointing of the mouth, chin's pulled up. This is a look of someone who's just feeling unhappy. Disgust. Disgust is an interesting one because sometimes it has like a physiological reaction, like there's food that grosses you out, or there's something that's, disgusting, or it could be a concept. But the reaction in the face is always the same. You're almost universally going to see the mouth raise up, the teeth shown, the wrinkling of the nose, because your body is actually trying to cut off the olfactory senses. So you're trying not to smell whatever it is. And you're going to see kind of this pullback. Nate showed it really well. You can see him like physically like come back, because I had him imagine something that grosses him out. So that was the face. The last one is contempt. Contempt is a very complex emotion. And actually, it was one that I had a really hard time when I was explaining this to my 9-year-old, because there's so many layers involved with contempt. And so I was having him model, behind this wall, and he just couldn't come up with the contempt picture. So I put the phone down, and then I was explaining to him, and then I mentioned this girl in his class. It just drives him bonkers. And he made that face. And that is a true micro expression of contempt. That mouth corner is raised up. There's a slight tightening of his eyes. I could not get him to replicate this emotion again up against a clear background. But this is a true definition of contempt. And I really want us to be aware of this, because this is a emotion that's so complicated that most of us get it wrong. One of my favorite social scientists, her name is Vanessa Van Edwards, and she has an amazing website called The Science of People. And in it, it has a lot of micro expressions, and there's a quiz where you can take and say, like, can I identify them? The contempt micro expression is one that most people get wrong. Only 57% of the general population could identify that. That's almost like a 50-50 split. This is really important, because if you see this face, especially if it's something that you're doing, like you're saying, and this is a reaction to you, you need to act on this pretty quick. And it's really important to be able to identify this. So now what do? You've looked at the 7 expressions, you're learning the signals. The biggest challenge for most people is to sort of lean in to those emotions. It's really easy to sort of dismiss emotions and say that they are illogical, and you just kind of go with what is in front of you, like what were the words that were stated. But that extra element where really you can dive into the EQ part has to do with identifying them, and then kind of in the back of your mind knowing, like, what would I say or do if I see this? So I'm going to give you an example that I think you all can kind of understand. You've probably all been there. You're at an OAC meeting. After the meeting, you and your coworker decide to take the client out for lunch. And your coworker says, oh, you know what? Let's go to the sushi place. And sushi is one of those foods that I think has like a really strong reaction. You either really love it or you might not love it. And if you see the disgust micro expression flash on your client's face, like you saw, remember, you're looking for the teeth and then the wrinkled nose, you might be able to guess that maybe your client doesn't want to do sushi, but then has like a fake smile afterwards because, she doesn't want to look unsophisticated, or she doesn't want to sort of tamp down your enthusiasm. So you see the smile with like the eyes aren't crinkling, So you've noticed this because you're now like this expert at observing facial expressions. So now you can say to her, oh, does sushi sound good? Or, do you want to try something else? There's a taco cart that's, 2 doors down. You don't necessarily have to say, you look disgusted by the thought of sushi. You don't have to say that, but just knowing that you saw that flash of expression and how to act on it is a game changer. These are tiny little adjustments in terms of like how you interact with people. So we talked about the 4 quadrants. This is the third part. This is what do I do? So this is the like the action element. And that falls squarely into the world of empathy. Empathy is really misunderstood. I feel it's one of those words that's like tossed around a lot and people don't really understand what it means. Empathy, straightforward, is all about stepping into the shoes of another person, aiming to understand their feelings and perspectives, and then use that understanding as a guide to how you act. That's all it is. It doesn't mean I agree with it. It just means I'm understanding it. So empathy is all about data points. You're getting accurate data points when you're being empathetic. It's not about being nice. It really is all about understanding first. Then I can talk and be understood, but I have to know where you're coming from and your point of view. How do you gain empathy? You hear this talked about a lot. People are talking about like the lack of empathy nowadays. And what's actually really interesting is studies, we do an IQ test, right? We study and track the intelligence quotient. So now there's studies on EQ. Studies in the last like 25 years have shown that our EQ rating is declining. So people are actually getting less and less able to use this skill. So I want to help us. I think this is a huge factor for all workplaces, especially in the design industry. This is what I want us to focus on. The first is ask, cognitive empathy. All you're doing is asking to gain that information. You're asking, you're listening, you're observing. Why is this important? That's kind of like your underlying question. The second is to think, emotional empathy. Do I understand why you have this viewpoint? Do I need to ask more questions? Do I really get it? And the third part is to give, empathetic concern. This is the extra mile in terms of like client care, customer service, where you're really thinking, what can I do to make your life better? I'm going to give us an example that I think all of us have been through. I've been through this, so I'm going to tell you this. It's empathy and this like ask, think, and give is so good when you're having conflict with someone, because when someone's driving you bonkers, odds are that you could help with this conflict or help with the situation by gaining more empathy. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you're working on a student housing project and you've been, you understand the programming, you understand like kind of like the needs of the client. You've talked about, the unit layout, how many beds you have. You've kind of gone through all the motions. It seems like every time you come up with this great design idea, a couple of days later, the client pushes back and says he doesn't want to do this. And keeps coming back with the concept of it's going to take too long. It's going to affect the schedule negatively. And you are being driven bonkers because you feel like, why did they hire me? I know what I'm doing. I'm a great designer. I just don't understand why this client isn't listening to me and keeps shooting down my ideas. This is where you ask. And you could do it in whatever form and format and question that works for you. But you really need to ask, like, why is this happening? And you ask the client, I noticed that I came up with this new design idea and, you said it wasn't a great one. You kept talking about the schedule. Like, what are the challenges that I'm missing on this project? Like, why is schedule such a driver on this project? And then you realize that the reason that the schedule is so important isn't just because, it's a student housing job and those kids need to move in by August, otherwise you have to like set them up in a hotel or whatnot. Turns out that the reputation of this developer is a really big deal. Like, they know the kids are talking, they're doing all this stuff on various message boards. And if they don't have a reputation of opening up on time, it's not only going to spoil this project, but it's going to hurt pre-sales for a whole bunch of other projects across the country. So they need to open on time. Like, this reputation is a huge part of their plan. And this is a huge challenge for the client. So now that I know that, can I start thinking and having emotional empathy, understanding why this client feels this way and why is, being so bananas about this schedule? Will that affect now what decisions I make? What, like the next time I'm at the OAC meeting, am I going to come up with different ideas, always with the lens of, okay, this is, how does this affect the schedule? Finally, I want to give. What can I do to make this person's life easier? And it could be a big thing, it could be a little thing. Maybe it's a big thing where I'm meeting with the general contractor and we're proactively going through things where I might come up with like a couple ideas and work with the GC to say, oh, wait, no, that's a long lead item. Like, yeah, we could do that and that wouldn't affect the schedule. Like, I'm thinking from that client's point of view instead of like butting heads and kind of like getting into conflict because they're not honoring me for my design skills because they keep shooting down my ideas. So this is how like empathy kind of fits into everything. So pop quiz. How many of you guys can name your firm's top clients? So since we're not here, I'm not going to point at anyone. I can't even see you guys. But in your head, I want you to see, like, could I name my top 5 clients? Could I name my top 10? Could I name top 20 clients? Then the bigger question is, do leaders and other departments in your firm know who these people are and how important they are? This is really important because I think most of you know that about 80% of your firm's work comes from 20% of your clients. You want to have like great relationships and express empathy with everyone, but you especially want to be paying attention to these top clients. And it's really important that everyone from like the CEO all the way down to the receptionist know who these people are. You have to have this. Everyone needs to know this. In particular, I don't know if any of you have ever dealt with these really like, sometimes you'll get like an aggressive person in accounting who doesn't really see sort of like where this client fits into the framework and will make like a really aggressive accounts receivable call because the person is like 3 days late on a payment. And I'm not saying that you let your AR slide to to like 90 days net. What I'm saying is, think about kind of like what's that other perspective? Like, is there a way for everyone to look at things from a client point of view and still get your work done and still get paid, still have everything moving forward, but doing it from the point of view of like looking at them, not necessarily only looking from like the angle that you have. So really kind of embracing that empathy. So the last quadrant, it's all about relationship management. The one thing I really want to stress with relationship management is that, when we talked about, clients and the know and the like and the trust, your client relationships need to have some personal element. Now, I'm not saying you have to like delve into things that are, exceptionally private, but just simple things like, do you know if your clients have kids? Are they dealing with this nightmare of remote learning? How might this be affecting their ability to make decisions, meetings? Just getting a sense of who they are and knowing that personal aspect adds to that know, like, and trust continuum. The next is trust. Trust is so important. I think you all know this as designers. When you have trust, it is like a lubricant to make decisions and things happen so much faster. When you make a recommendation, your client knows you are doing it in their best interest. No one's second guessing you. No one's micromanaging you. You move from like providing a service to being like a real trusted advisor. And trust is built over time, but it also involves so many of these little elements, especially where you have that empathy. When you see things from your client's point of view, it is so much likelier for you to develop that trust than when you try to sort of like strong arm your way in because of your talent or because of your point of view being the only way to go. Next, relationships require reciprocity. Yes, you're providing design services, but you are also getting paid for those design services. So you need to think of like, what is it you can do to help your client, even if it doesn't add to the bottom line of your firm. These could be tiny things. It doesn't have to be like free services. They could be small things where you're talking to your client, you realize like maybe she's feeling anxious about how she's going to reopen the office and doesn't know what to do. Like there's all these rules that you just don't know, how am I going to, have a safe opening for my office? You might be able to say, hey, I have some guidelines. Another studio has been working on this. How about I share some input that you can use? It's not adding to like your bottom line in terms of revenue, but it's making that client feel really taken care of. It's building that relationship. That client knows that like you're looking out for them in a way that's like meaningful. The next is relationships need frequency. You have to constantly be caring for relationships. So it doesn't have to be a big deal, but I want you in your mind realizing that the way to sort of increase that EQ for that quadrant 4, which is relationships and how do I deal with others, involves frequently talking to people. They could be small things, small emails, but you can't just rely on OAC meetings or like official interactions to build a relationship. So you think, that's great, Janky, but how the heck do I find time to do that? I'm on 100 Zoom calls a day. I am busier now than I've ever been. I totally hear you. I completely understand. These are some things that have worked for me. And like I said, it's all about coming up with ideas that work, that you can use for you. The first is technology. A lot of us are still working from home. Embrace that technology. Call a client, schedule like a quick 15-minute Teams call or Zoom call just to see their face and say, hey, I miss seeing you. I want to hear what's going on. How's that whole, distance learning? Did school start up again? How's that going for you? Maybe you found a cool article that has to deal with like parents and distance learning. You just send them an email with that article and said, I read this and I thought about you. That's like a great use of technology. Now, the other thing you could do is not use technology. I found these note cards. I want to show this to you. This is from a local artist on Etsy, and she has these Austin quarantine cards. So it has the Joe's Coffee Shop on South Congress. It's I love you so much. And then below it, it says, but stay 6 feet away. I think these are adorable. And I've been writing and sending these to clients. I'll send them a quick note saying, hey, I'd like to send you something in the mail. What's the best address? Sometimes I'll say, just send it to the office, but it's just like a tiny thing that lets them know that, hey, I'm thinking about you. I hope things are okay. Again, it's about, the next one is be interested, not interesting. This goes back to like the godfather of networking, which is Dale Carnegie and his How to Win Friends and Influence People book. And it's not about me pontificating about like what I think and what I'm doing. It's all about me paying attention and being interested. I'm listening. Most people feel that like no one's listening anymore and they aren't being heard. So if you call a client and you're asking them like, what's going on with you? How is this project going? What are your concerns? Are you worried about opening up on time? Are the kids moving into your student housing project? You're interested in what they have to say, just ask a couple of those questions, kind of going back to that empathy, and let them do the talking. And the same thing there, embrace empathy, especially that extra mile. It is the quickest way to add trust in a relationship is when you do things that make someone feel cared for and taken, like you're doing the extra mile. So I want us to dive into how to hug your clients figuratively. When I talk about this is based on a concept by Jack Mitchell, who is the CEO of the Mitchell family of stores. He wrote this great book called Hug Your Customers, and he's all about like how to anticipate needs. You're going to give more. You're really personal in your interactions. And his company does a lot of like high-end retail. It's like really custom clothes. And he noticed that even during the economic dips, they did well because they were always paying attention to their customers and showing their customers great service, especially in an industry that was like declining in customer service. So as we talk about hugs, I have to talk about this quote. It's from Pablo Picasso. It's called, he says, good artists copy, great artists steal. This was a quote that was used a lot by the late Steve Jobs. He really believed that one of the best things to do was to look at what's working at other places, take those elements and use it for yourself. He particularly used this quote for, he was exploring the Apple stores. And the area that he stole from was the Four Seasons. So the customer and client experience that was given by the Four Seasons is what was the motivator for the Apple stores. And that's kind of interesting because now the Apple stores are a motivator for places like the Lego store and Tesla. A lot of places sort of now model themselves on the Apple sort of client experience. So I want us in the AEC industry to look at like, what can we start stealing from places that are doing things right in order for us to take care of our clients better? Remember, the EQ score on average is going down. So if you're doing these baby steps that can make your EQ rise, you're going to be golden. It doesn't have to be big things. It could be small things. So I love reading customer experience stories, especially ones where people write in about like, this is why I'm going to be a customer for life. Zappos has an amazing reputation for customer service as well as employee, culture. And this story is just a primo example of empathy in action. So I'll summarize it. It's kind of long. Basically, a man buys a pair of shoes, and before he could receive them, he ends up in the hospital, and then he passes away. So he dies of lung cancer, and his wife calls Zappos and says, "Hey, he's got these shoes here that he never even opened because of what happened. Can I return them?" And the ask, think, and give model is just flat out like represented here. Not only does the customer service rep say, of course, we'll definitely refund the money. She says, you know what, just donate the shoes. We don't even need them back. Give them to someone else who could use them. And then she sends her a dozen roses. Look at the quote at the end that the grandchild wrote. That's the kind of thing that reminds me the world is not such a terrible place, and there really are good people out there. This was not a huge investment for a company like Zappos, but they have a client for life. Someone was so motivated that they posted this on Reddit. I want us to start thinking about this. What kind of like emotional empathy can I do where I not only sort of understand what the client is going through? I mean, the customer service rep could have just simply refunded the shoes and asked for them back. That's like the ask, but they kind of delved in a little more to have like this amazing experience. Here's another hug that was like a third-party hug. Someone saw this happening and they reported it on Target's Facebook site. This is such an adorable story. Basically, this kid walks into a Target and asks for a clip-on tie. Target doesn't sell clip-on ties, but the crew member asked, like, why do you need the clip-on tie? Turns out the kid is about to go to a job interview, and he needs a tie, but he doesn't know how to tie a tie. So the crew comes in, like a bunch of the folks on the floor come in. They help him tie the tie. They spruce him up. They help him tuck his shirt in. They practice how to do that good handshake and practice some interview questions. They cheer him on as he's leaving the store. Someone watches this and is so moved that she writes this whole story up. This is a true customer service, right on the mark target. That's what this is motivated. This goes back to the ask, think, give, empathy. What can I do to make your life a little better? And it turns out the kid got the job. He was applying to Chick-fil-A, which is another company that's like all about amazing customer service. What elements of this can I steal from my own company? What are the teeny things that I can do beyond just what's required? All that was required from the sales floor was to say there wasn't clip-on ties. They did so much more for not that much more effort. Client hug, we talk about those cards. Here's an example. Someone liked this card so much, they took a picture of it and posted it on the internet. I mean, people are starving for this stuff. Look at this card. It's not even, like, it's not very, verbose. It just said, thank you. Thanks for choosing us. I hope you were happy with the way things went. How many times has that happened to, to an auto repair place where someone called and said, or sent a note saying, I really appreciate that you choose us. I could choose any number of like tow places or auto repair places. You choosing me, meant something. Small, tiny little thing that we can steal. It's all about, remember, great artists steal. So what can we do? So here are my final thoughts on this. I love, there's this blog that Angie Lee, she was at VOA Now Stantec, wrote on the Stantec blog, and then later on was republished in Building Design and Construction. And she says, EQ is also about embracing our design process. It enables us to be better designers, better listeners, better collaborators who shepherd and champion great design. we've talked a lot during this conference about, not just like the practice of design and sort of the skills of design, but we've also talked about equity in design. How do we get those voices that aren't at the table? How do we get them heard? How do we connect better to become better sort of stewards of space? That's where EQ comes in. This is a skill. We can learn it, we can develop it. It's not just about being technically talented. It's really looking at those 4 quadrants. How do I, connect with people? And how do I develop these people skills? It is a skill. You can develop it. You don't have to be born with it. It's something that we all can get better at. So, I love reading. Anyone who knows me knows there's always a book I'm reading. And I've had a lot of fun doing research for this talk. These are all the books that I use to help with it. They're all available at the Austin Public Library. And I really want to recommend that you dive in, especially if there was a section that you're like, I really want to know more about, like hugging. I really want to know about the business advantage of EQ. Dive into these books. They're so good. So to recap, if you're still awake, here's a recap of what I talked about. Number 1, emotional intelligence is that secret sauce. This is going to be the game changer for you and your firm, and it can be developed. Remember, clients choose based on do they know you, do they like you, and do they trust you? Those are the 3 things that really make a difference. Steps to increase your EQ. Remember the 4 quadrants? So you want to identify your emotions and feelings, the self-awareness, paying attention to other people's feelings, especially those micro expressions. Empathy, the ask, think, and give. Going down that list. It's really, really helpful when you're having conflict with someone. When someone's driving you nuts, that's your sign that I need to dive into the empathy. And then develop and nurture relationships. That's the last part of the quadrant. Then we're all about finding these hugging moments. What can I do? What are small things that I can do to make someone feel special, make them feel sort of figuratively hugged? So here's your homework. I always find that the best way to sort of have something sink in is to do a little homework. Otherwise, this was like an hour that we spent chatting, and then this is one of those like, it's kind of nice to have things, but it doesn't like take you to that next level of like sinking in. So what I want you to do is a little bit of homework. So the first is I want you to identify which quadrant is the strongest and weakest for you. These aren't linear, these are different elements. So you might find that you're really good at developing relationships, but you're not as self-aware as you probably need to be. Or, those micro expressions were things that you had no clue about, and they, you want to delve into that. Try to figure out where you are in those 4. The next is to fill out your own answers for the micro expression chart. What are you going to do when you see those like 11s, the anger sign come up? What can you say to your client? What can you say to a coworker if you see that expression? And as long as everyone has their cameras on during the video call, you can also see those expressions there. I've seen them. Sometimes you can also hear it in the tone of voice, but it's really good for you, especially if emotions kind of overwhelm you, to think about what you would do if you saw all those. Pick one way that you can hug a client. It doesn't have to be big. Remember the examples I showed you were, I think the one that was the most expensive was the sending the flowers. Most of them were small, simple things that can be done. And a lot of that comes from empathy, but you could think of things, I think, within your group of what are small things you could do to make sure that clients feel cared for. And then finally, I want you to identify one relationship that maybe that slipped during the quarantine and reach out. Maybe there's someone who you haven't talked to since March, since February. They're not an active client. Maybe it's a trade partner. Maybe it's a consultant. Think about somebody that relationship is important, and find a way to connect. You can either call them, email them, you can buy a set of note cards, send them out, something. Think about that. That's it for me. So if you have questions or comments, I can't even see any of the comments. So if you had any, or you have some hugging stories, like some amazing customer stories that have come from you being on the beneficiary side, I would love to hear them. If you're one of those people that kind of like needs to process things, as we've talked about it, feel free to share it later. This is my email address. I'm with DCI Engineers, so you can find me at jdepalma. You also can find me on LinkedIn. I try to be fairly active there. So if you want to comment on just kind of like connect with me, and then we can comment about your stories or things that you either agree with or disagree with in terms of emotional intelligence, I would love to keep this conversation going. So with that, I'm going to end my talk. I'm going to stop sharing, if that's all right. And let's see if you have any questions or you have any topics that you'd like to talk about. I'm really open to hearing from them.
Silence, Janky.
I know.
Oh, there is a question in the Q&A.
Thank you. Whoever threw me a bone, I appreciate it.
Do you see it?
I do. Thank you, my friend Mindy. She said, do you have any recommendations for talking with someone who has a low EQ? You know what, I will be really honest with you. I sometimes have a hard time with this because I have my quadrants that are really high tend to be the ones with like connecting with people and reading people. And I realize that I need to work sometimes on my empathy. So if I see someone who's, has a low EQ, I have to sort of ask myself, like, where are they coming from? Why are they doing this? And I will sometimes realize that I put my own, if I don't stop and like with that ask, think, and give, I will just make horrendous assumptions like, oh, this person's, acting this way on purpose. And, they're purposefully ignoring the fact that I have like a scowl on my face. I tread really lightly on using the words like feelings and emotions, especially like I work with engineers. So I sometimes won't mention that, but I will try to kind of like work that in terms of the empathy, like kind of like, I noticed you did this, kind of like, why do you feel this is like, why do you feel this way? Or you seemed, you seem like you didn't appreciate like what I mentioned at the leadership meeting. Did you want to talk about it? Or, was I reading that correctly? That sometimes has helped a little bit. Oh, someone wrote, great presentation. You mentioned Michael Scott as an example of lacking EQ. Do you have an example of characters with great EQ? Oh, that's a good one. I hadn't thought about that. There's a few. I'm trying to think people who, okay, this is going to sound a little silly, but I think two characters that have really high EQs are the gal from Clueless, Cher Horowitz, that character. She has like a good understanding of like people and connecting with them. Like she lacks a little bit of self-awareness, but I think she does a really good job of having the ability to connect. She has a strong degree of empathy. That is a reboot of the not Pride and Prejudice, it's Emma. So it's a reboot of Jane Austen's Emma. So that actually goes more towards like classic literature. I'm trying to think if there's another one that deals with like in a situation comedy. I don't know. That was a good one. I'll have to reply back later. I didn't think of that one. Someone said I feel hugged already. Oh, thank you. Any other questions, or are there things that you feel like? My husband and I played around with this talk a lot, and he was sort of like, aren't these things a little too personal for, in terms of clients, like, delving into that? I'm curious if any of you feel like you would want to delve into knowing about how a client is personally. Like, would you feel comfortable asking them, like, how's distance learning, or even do you have kids, or things like that? Oh, the question just popped up. Oh, Liz, thank you. Liz writes, this is so important. I feel like EQ involves a lot of learning by doing. Do you think experience is also a big factor in developing EQ? Excuse me. Yes and no. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think you can have strong EQ even if like you're straight out of school. And I think part of I feel like the big part as you, especially as designers, because you're talking a lot about like connecting and sort of, uh, you're doing a lot of like psychological interpretation of what a client needs, right? So I think it could be developed at any stage. But a huge part of it starts with like looking at it from someone else's point of view. Like I think, that empathy and trying to look at, it's really difficult, I think, for groups where you have so much, like such high intelligence, like you go through the process of being smart, through years of study and then getting licensed. I mean, engineers are the same way. It's really difficult to then say, okay, aside from the logical aspects of what I learned through school, what do I do to sort of talk about the feelings and look at it from someone else's point of view, especially if that other person maybe isn't as like technically knowledgeable as I am. So I don't know. I don't know if I quite answered the question, but I think it's something that as a service provider, we always have to be thinking about. Like I could be replaced by at least 3 other engineers at any moment. So how can I go beyond like the technical abilities and really make a person feel that like I was taking care of them? Because at the end of the day, that's really what we all want to do, right? Like we want to give our clients an amazing experience. Oh, thanks, Ingrid wrote. Why do you find it why wait, do we find it hard to read people now that we're all wearing masks? Oh, I'm glad everyone's wearing a mask, right? Um, sometimes I have to say that we're wearing masks in the office a little bit, and it is weird because you're only like seeing the eyes. I think there's some elements that you can see, like with like the angry face or the surprised face. Part of, in addition to micro expressions, I think we also want to look at like other nonverbal signals. I didn't really get into them, but there's like tone of voice and there's sort of other body language. I think sometimes you can even find them in emails. Like if you look really carefully at an email, even though you can't get the tone, you can sometimes see like this person's kind of expressing some fear that I'm going to miss their deadline, and that's what's you know what I might interpret it as micromanaging, but really it's like a fear that I'm not taking this seriously. Um, let's see. Uh, what do you think is the most important takeaways for teams or company leaders when it comes to EQ and employees? I would really argue that the most important thing is it's like a meta statement, is that it's important. I feel like as a society we spend so much time paying attention to IQ, and a lot of this other stuff is dismissed, and I think the more study I've done on EQ, the more I realize that this is actually part of like the biggest prediction of success. And I think anecdotally, we see a lot of people who are incredibly intelligent, and you wonder like, why aren't they more successful? And it's the EQ. And I think it would be great for companies to develop it more and then use it as part of their hiring, like instead of just maybe looking at portfolio and like grade point average, to kind of see sort of like what emotional aspects does a person have. And some schools are piloting the training of EQ, or they call it social and emotional learning. My boys are going through that with AISD, but most of us weren't taught that. And I think a lot of us either feel that you're either born with it or you're not, or it's not important. Like all that matters is that you're technically skilled. And I think we've all run into that situation, like at a meeting where it's like it's all about how someone makes you feel at the end of the day, and you just don't want to work with this person no matter how technically talented they are. So this is a super long answer, but I would say I wish more companies saw the value of this. Like skills are important, but this one is probably the biggest skill. I mean, when I read the stat that 35% of employees would forego a pay raise in order to have their manager have EQ training, that blew my mind. I just couldn't believe. And like, you're 400% more likely to lose an employee based on some type of EQ issue. Usually it's like their relationship with their manager. It has less to do with like how much they're paid, the type of work they do. I mean, think about like the hiring, like the talent war we were under like 6 months ago. Think about how much different it would make if if you knew you weren't going to lose like amazing employees because of, you know, skills that you could work on. Mindy, let's see. Shibra, thank you. One more. In my experience, women are often leaned on heavily for their EQ skills and emotional labor in the AEC environments. Has this been your experience, and is it true for others on the panel? What can we as women do to help make this work more balanced and equally shared? Yeah, I think it's one that like the Daniel Goleman book talks a lot about this, where it's actually one of the factors that sometimes trips up men because they don't see its value. I think kind of going back to the other question about like what could companies do, if companies if companies saw this as a valuable skill, like this is just as important as say your project management skills or your Revit skills. I think then some of the load would be taken off. It wouldn't be like, oh, well, you're a woman, so you could like, you know, manage this emotions. Do people assume we have good EQ skills because we are women? I think yes and no. I think it is easier for women to embrace their EQ because it's less socially frowned upon. I think a lot of times there's this kind of correlation of like emotions to being irrational. So it's sort of like, well, I'm just logical, kind of like a Spock character. So I don't care if that client showed whatever the heck on his face. Like I'm just dealing with like the facts. And I think that's something that's sort of slowly being addressed with all this social and emotional learning that is being taught in schools right now. Let's see. I answered that one. Was there any more? I think. So those, I mean, I think part of the things to think about, what I would do if I were you is like, if there were little things that you can incorporate, that could be kind of fun to say, to try that. And then I would really look at sort of, there's a bottom line sort of business reason to do this. It really isn't about being nice. It really is kind of like, what could I do to help get better clients? How do I keep the clients that that don't treat us like a commodity? How do I become a better designer through these elements? I would always focus on that instead. And then see if you are a woman who has like better EQ skills, maybe either naturally or you feel like you're given that opportunity, I would try to share that with people. Let me see. Okay, I feel EQ. Oh, by the way, Ingrid, you tell me when to stop talking. It says, I feel like EQ involves a lot of learning by doing. Do you think? Oh, this is the one that Liz said. I answered that. I think I might have answered all these. Yep, I think I did. Wow, we got a few questions. I might have time for one more question. Otherwise, I think we have like a minute left. So if anyone wants to share what they felt was their strongest quadrant, I'm really curious. I will share my weakest one is the self-awareness. That's the one I realized that I needed to do a lot of work on, was identifying my own emotions. Thanks, Ingrid. Micro expressions. So if you want to play around with micro expressions and you're at home, I will tell you two places I have a lot of fun doing it now are, so I've been, we were watching, my older son's like really into basketball. So we've been watching the Last Dance, the Bulls, it's like a kind of like a documentary, and it involves a lot of interviews. You're going to see tons of micro expressions there. Like when you have a close up of Michael Jordan and he's talking about his feelings of Isaiah Thomas at with the Pistons, and you will see like you will actually see a contempt micro expression show, and then he'll kind of like blank his face out a little. But once you start seeing them, it's really fun to watch. So I've been doing that. I've been annoying my family by doing that. And the other one we've been watching is Indian Matchmaker. And there's a lot of expressions there where people like flash it and then they put on like a fake smile or more like stoic expression. So if you ever want to be able to play around with like seeing if you can identify those, reality TV is a good place to do it.
Thank you so much, Janky.
Well, thank you for having me. If you have comments or, want to share like how you're going to use this, I would love to hear it. I think this is so much fun. And it's something that I'm really honored to be able to share these thoughts at this conference, because I know there's so many important things we're talking about, and there's so many skills that we're talking about, that if I could see this as part of like the design industry, I just think everyone here is so talented. I would love to be able to see you guys connect with people in even a more meaningful way.
I think that's really powerful. And I'll always remember my editor, Robert Ivy, back in the day at Architectural Records saying, never underestimate the power of a handwritten note. And I've never forgotten that. It's a real thing.
It is. It's wonderful. I still get excited when I get one. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for attending. I think this is the last session of our day 2 Design Excellence Conference. So we'll see you tomorrow.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Sure.
Bye.
Bye.